Hello friends, my name is Nathan Talamantez and I am the recipient of the 2022 with Honor and Pride Fellowship from the Writers Colony at Derry Hollow. And I am here today to remind you that you are 34 years old. Or at least you were 34 years old. Or if you are not 34 years old yet, you will be, and at which point you will immediately cease to be 34 and continue on to being 35. The point being that you're not in the same place that you were a year ago, nor at the one that you will be in a year from today. And that can be helpful to remember. If you suffer from chronic pain as I do, or perhaps you're elderly and don't get around as well as you used to, and now you suffer from loneliness on certain days, well then you realize that not every moment and not every day can be a good day. Sometimes it's helpful to lean back into our memories, to rediscover who we are, and use it as a branch to hold on to during a time of trial. And this is really the overall point of this video series. I want to help you re-engage with your past, to use it for strength. We're going to mine it by creating a short memoir essay. Now, what we're looking at doing is writing about 5 to 6 pages, double-spaced, maybe 1,500 words. For this course, you might choose to engage with a single memory or a series that are tied together by a theme. Because 1,500 words is manageable, it's a reasonable goal, and it's something that if you were to hand off this essay to your family or friends, reading it wouldn't be a burden. It would be a quick 10-minute read. And in fact, there's a few purposes you could have for writing this article. Like I said, you can choose to send it to your family and friends, or you can create a new family heirloom. It's kind of a time capsule that expresses your life in a better way than a photo of your morning latte ever could. Or you could set up for the article to be printed in memoriam in your local newspaper. First, let me tell you a little bit more about what memoir is. So memoir is a slice of life. Memoir is not fiction in that you will be creating your story from actual events that happened to you. But at the same time, memoir is not biography in that the story that you're telling is less about you as an individual and more about the reader. If you've never read memoir and would like to get a better idea before writing your own, I have a couple suggested readings you could try. My Dad Tried to Kill Me with an Alligator by Harrison Scott Key is a wonderful example of a memoir. Also, I Had a Stroke at 33 by Christine Hyung de Oak Lee. But if you really want to check out some good memoir, I have a book here that I just loved this last year called Gordo by Jaime Cortez. I especially recommend the memoir short story that is based on the title, El Gordo. Well, now that we've discussed our goal and a little bit about what memoir is, it's time to figure out how we're going to skin this cat. Let's see. So I have 10 guidelines that I'm going to give you that are going to make you a better writer overall, but they specifically apply to memoir, and they come with exercises that's going to help you develop your essay. So as we move along these 10 steps, by the end, you should have an excellent piece of memoir. Also, I want to warn you here that this video's length is deceptive and that there are exercises, there are pauses, there are times that I'm going to give you just a little bit of homework, but at the end, you're going to have that beautiful memoir essay that can become a new family heirloom. So please, I invite you to invest the time, give yourself this present of recovering a memory. Getting started with guideline number 1, write what you passionately know. Ernest Hemingway famously said, write what you know. And this is kind of a no-brainer for memoir, but I think it's a good reminder that everything that you will be writing is already inside of your head. You just have to arrange and recover it. So on to the other part of this rule, which is passion. You're going to write this essay because we're going to find you a memory that you are passionate about, that you want to express. Your passion about the subject we find is what's going to drive you to complete this project. Now, I have a few exercises. First, you're going to make a timeline of between 5 and 10 events. On one side of this timeline, you write 0, and the other side, your current age. For me, 34. And while I want you to list these events chronologically, they don't need to be evenly spaced in years, and you don't need to include the major events that you might think you should, such as high school graduation or your wedding. These events are drawn from the moments that you feel are important. As you go through the Rolodex or the timeline you're scrolling through your mind, what are the pictures that matter to you? These are your events, and I want you to come up with between 5 and 10. Pause the video, and I will be here when you get back. Great. Once you have your 8 to 10 events, I want you to circle 3 of them. You're going to write those 3 events elsewhere and write 1 to 2 sentences just giving a basic description of what happened there. Alright, next I'm going to want you to come up with 3 related events for each of your 3 chosen events. The way this can work is, imagine that you wrote down, well, what I wrote down, join the military. That's a large event comprised of many events. I'd like you to break that down into maybe the moment that I decided to join the military, maybe the medical, the signing of the contracts or paperwork, or just arriving at basic training or the basic training process. That's the way I would split up an event into 3. What happened perhaps before, during, after. Please pause. I will be here when you get back. Alright, and finally, you have gotten a good idea of what happened in each of your 3 possible events. You've come up with 3 events related to each, and now it's time for you to pick the juiciest. This will be your topic. And I highly suggest you throwing away whatever idea you came in with of the event and continuing with this topic because it has juice. And now you've chosen your event. Congratulations. But before we continue, I'm going to need you to drop into that event. I need you to return to that moment. Here, I'm going to give you an example by doing it myself. So I'm going to ground myself and close my eyes and remember it was 2013. And I was on a aluminum bus driving through the gates of Lackland with maybe 50 to 30 other people, other trainees, and the bus smelled horribly like wet, cold sweat. And I remember pulling up and the sound of the door opening, and then the drill instructor climbing on board and standing in the center of the aisle, and he started yelling at us instantaneously for being so lazy as to still be on the bus and not off. Now, this created an odd situation in that many of the new trainees stood on the bus, but none got into the center of the aisle because the drill instructor was there, blocking the way for us to get by. So, it was a little bit of a game, I guess. He was telling us that he wanted us off the bus, but he was standing in the way and everyone was afraid to go by. So I got with maybe the first 3 people who were just kind of sneaking on by like scared cattle, and I became the 4th. And we passed that drill instructor in the center aisle. He led us without saying anything. We got off the bus and continued on to the drill pad. There on the drill pad, us 4 were told to get in the line. Our part in this whole game was done. But as we stood there, we saw hordes of these goblin drill instructors heading towards the bus and forming a gauntlet line to yell at all the new trainees for how lazy they were for not getting off the bus. So the game was going to get worse, and few had gotten out of the way before too much hazing was done. So what was going on with this experience? I mean, basically the drill instructors were hazing us, but They were hazing us with anxiety to see if we would perform under pressure or if we were going to fight back and get angry at them for yelling in our faces. And that's something that the military had to know before sending us somewhere where we could be in a dangerous environment. But okay, now it's your turn. I'm going to want you to drop into your moment. I'm going to want you to take a few moments to breathe and close your eyes and pause this video and try your best to relive that experience. I will be here when you return. Great, that was guideline 1 and the exercises. Guideline 1 is the longest, but you've now selected your topic and you've dropped into that moment, and now soon we're going to begin to write. On to guideline 2, which is know the stakes of your story by knowing your character's goals. Stakes and goals, what's the difference? Well, a goal is what your character, probably yourself in the story, wanted, and the stakes are what's at risk. So first, I'm going to ask you to figure out your character, likely yourself. I want to know what their goal is. What was it during the story that you wanted? How was it that you hoped things would turn out? And there will likely be two aspects of this, an internal goal and an external goal. The external goal, I'll use my basic training example here. For me, would have been to exit the bus. I wanted to get off the bus. But my internal goal is the deeper goal, which is, on the other hand, I wanted to graduate basic training and be done with the entry to the military and just be on with the rest of my time as a grunt. So now it's your turn. I'd like you to take a moment to identify your character's internal and external goal. Kind of, you could think of it as the small goal and the larger goal. All right, now that we have talked about goals, let's talk about stakes, because stakes is where we get our tension in your story. So stakes are, what do you have to lose? Let's go back to my basic training example. Why does it matter what the drill instructor thinks, and what does he have to do with anything in my story? Well, so the tension in my story lies in the drill instructor's capability to flunk me out of basic training. So if I was wanting to build the stakes, I might get better insight into the working mind of that possibility. I'd like you as well to find the stakes in your story to identify what was at risk, and I will see you in guideline 3. Guideline 3, this is where we really check your commitment. Guideline 3 is writing is learned by writing. Now, this sounds self-explanatory, but it's like they say about instruments, practice, 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 and it's true. Here's where you need to go and try to just get the story out. Just get the demon out. Write the story of what happened to you in whatever form it takes. 2 pages, 4 pages, 6 pages. I care not, as long as you get it down. Now, the main fear you may be up against here is the challenge of the blank page. The fear that what you put down isn't going to be very good initially. And let me reassure you, it probably won't. Mine isn't either. Most books you've ever read in your life were written in 3 different drafts. And the first one is seldom read by anybody. That's the draft that I'm asking you to write right now, as you just get the story out. And to assist and encourage you, I'm going to quote from Anne Lamott's national bestseller, Bird by Bird. I have read many books of writing advice, and this may have been the first, and I still believe this is probably the best. I'm going to quote from her chapter titled Shitty First Drafts. The first draft is the child's draft, where you let it all pour out and then let it romp all over the place, knowing that no one will see it and that you can shape it later. You just let this childlike part of you channel whatever voices and visions come through onto the page. Just get it all down on paper, because there may be something great in those 6 crazy pages that you would never have gotten to by more rational means. There may be something in the very last line of the very last paragraph on page 6 that you just love, that is so beautiful or wild that you now know what you're supposed to be writing about, more or less, or in what general direction you might go. But there was no way to get to this without first getting through the first 5.5 pages. Here's your homework. You need to go home and write this story down, just in whatever form it takes. And I will see you in the next guideline, Writing is Rewriting. Alright, part 2, Writing is Rewriting. These next 3 guidelines all have to do with reworking that rough draft that you did as homework in the last guideline. So the first thing we're going to do is follow guideline 4, and it's time to identify our theme. What is your story about? What is it really about? What are you trying to say? Maybe you know, maybe you only think you do, but I have a process to help us arrive at your theme. Now, everything we're going to do in this workshop builds on one another. So here in guideline 4, to identify your theme, I'm going to need you to review your answers to guideline 2. I need you to look back at the stakes you identified and the goals of your character, because these alone are not your theme, but they are topics. There's single words that are topics in a sentence, and that sentence will be your theme. So common examples of topics include love, self-worth, family, self-sacrifice. Look, topics don't need to be original. There's only a certain amount of topics out there, but they do need to be true to your story. So first thing to do to find your theme is I want you to make a list of at least 3 topics. So write those down now. From this list of topics, we're going to create a sentence that will be your theme. And that theme needs to express your story's truth, the universal truth that you are trying to say in this story. If we were to take my basic training story again, where the petrified trainees were stuck on the bus while more people gathered to yell at them, while me and a couple of other people are standing there in line with our part done, you could say that the theme is that inaction does not pay. And that's a fair theme for a story about joining the military. And now it's your turn. I want you to use a few of your topics to create your theme sentence. Now create the sentence that tells your story's truth. Congratulations, now you've identified your theme. And it's like I said, every guideline is going to build on to the next. So now that you've identified your theme, your next job will be to build the thematically relevant. So what's thematically relevant? Well, anything related to that sentence that we just discovered in your last step. 2 moments guaranteed to be thematically relevant are your inciting incident and your climax. You could think of these 2 as cause and effect. While these 2 are the most prominent events of your story, you likely have other moments that are thematically relevant. So the exercise I want you to do here is to go back through your original rough draft with a highlighter and highlight any sentences, any paragraphs, anything that's thematically relevant to the sentence that you wrote. Now these are the pieces that are important. This is what we're going to want to build and expand upon in this step. If you can find something else to say about these events to bring us further into the moment, now that we have highlighted them and know they're thematically relevant, we know that they are worth working on. And the other side of the coin of building the thematically relevant is to cut the non-essentials, which is our guideline 6. Here, I'd like you to look back at the first line of your story, and I'd like you to ask yourself, why did you choose to begin here? If your answer is because this is the moment before your inciting event and everything begins to change, perfect. But if this isn't where you chose to begin, perhaps you need to adjust your beginning by cutting some of the non-essentials to get us closer into the action. What else might be a non-essential? Well, this might hurt to hear, but about anything that's not highlighted. Any sideline information, details that are not thematically relevant, your reader is going to see as a red herring that detracts from your overall plot. So take the time to go over your story one more time and cut out the needless details. And next we're to guideline 7, where I'm going to ask you to do the most vulnerable thing that I've asked so far, and that's to seek criticism. There is nothing like getting a good, honest critique of your work, even if it can hurt. And to get a good, honest critique, you have to select somebody who you trust and who loves you, doesn't want to destroy your emotions. Or you can pay a writer like me on Upwork to give you developmental notes. But however you choose to do it, you will find large plot holes that you were blind to just by letting someone else into your world to see what you're working on. So your homework here is, after you build the thematically relevant and cut the non-essentials, I would like you to consider seeking criticism. So let's talk about what we're looking for here in criticism. I'd like to start by reading you a quote by one of my favorite authors, Neil Gaiman, that I always think of when considering criticism. Remember, when people tell you something's wrong or doesn't work for them, they're almost always right. When they tell you exactly what they think is wrong and how to fix it, they're almost always wrong. So we're not looking for an answer from your reader that's just whether it's good or bad, I liked it, I didn't like it. And we're also not looking for them to tell us exactly how you should fix the problem, because they likely don't know. What we're looking for are clues on how to make your work better. It's a puzzle that your reader can't possibly figure out alone, and that you came to them for their eyes to help you figure out how to make your story better. So what I want you to do is you're going to listen to their opinions, and you're going to draw out some specific information by asking questions that require more than a yes or no response. Tell me what you liked about the story, or what you would have liked to see more of or different, and then we can go deeper from there. But once you've collected their opinions, I'm going to suggest that you sleep on them before enacting any large changes that they might have suggested. Because like Neil Gaiman said, suggestions are almost always wrong. There is an answer, and there is legitimately a problem if they call it out. But you need to give yourself the time to find the best way to answer that question by sleeping on it. So it's time to get some criticism after working on that rough draft, and I will see you in part 3 of this video. Alright, part 3 at the end of a narrative arc is a takeaway. We're on to guideline 8, which is my spin on a classic piece of advice, which is show, don't tell. But instead of that, I'm going to tell you to show the thematically relevant and tell the in-between. Let me give you an example of what I mean. The world is changed. I can feel it in the water. I can feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air. Much that was once was is lost, for now none live who remember it. It began with the forging of the great rings. 3 were given to the elves, immortal, wisest and fairest of all beings. 7 to the dwarf lords, great miners and craftsmen of the mountain halls. And 9 rings were gifted to the race of men, who above all else desire power. For within these rings was bound the strength and the will to govern each race, but they were all of them deceived, for another ring was made. Deep in the land of Mordor, in the fires of Mount Doom, the Dark Lord Sauron forged a master ring, and into this ring he poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life. Now, I use this beautiful piece of exposition to dispel a common myth, that all showing is good and all telling is bad. Because in this piece of exposition, Tolkien doesn't show you Sauron forging the ring. He tells you about it. Tolkien does this because telling is an excellent device to relay background information quickly and set our real events in motion. If you are writing a memoir that uses scenes from multiple events, then telling might be the perfect tool to move you seamlessly from one event to another. And when you get to those thematically relevant events, then that will be the time for you to drop in and bring us closer by beginning to show instead of tell. So I didn't want to teach you about showing too early in our guidelines, because showing tends to expand the story quite a bit. And once you've spent so much time setting up showing a scene, then it makes it much harder to cut it. But now that you've highlighted the thematically relevant, you already know the moments that you should be expanding, and you're less likely to waste your time on meaningless details. Let me give you an easy example of the difference between showing and telling. Imagine you could tell me that you burnt dinner last night, or you could show me by saying that when you got it out of the oven, it was all black and crunchy on the bottom. You never told me that it was burnt. I would have inferred that by those details. You showed it to me. So, showing is the way to go with pivotal or thought-provoking moments that you want your readers to care a lot about, because they give your reader little mental puzzles that they get to do for themselves, and they like finding the answer more than being told the answer. For instance, I could tell you that my bunkmate's toenail in basic training went entirely black, but I could leave it to you to figure out why. Showing and telling is the difference between your father telling you that he got a colonoscopy and him describing the play-by-play. At minimum, I want you to go back and try to show us those moments of the inciting event and the climax. There may be other moments that you can bring us into, and that would be great. But at least I can tell you that these two events in your story would be better shown than told. Guideline number 9, the most predictable piece of advice guaranteed to show up on any writing guideline list: be specific. Specific language will tell your reader how to envision your story, whereas generalized language asks your reader to constantly withdraw from the scene that you're trying to show them to fill in details. I'll give you an example. We were on a boat. What kind of boat? When? Where? Who? Well, it was 1913 in East Africa. I was a riverboat gambler escorting a little uptight missionary lady named Rose past the German lines to safety. You see what I'm saying here about how specific language lets so much more of the story come into focus? William Strunk, in his over 100-year-old timeless masterpiece of writing advice, The Elements of Style, said that you should avoid tame and non-committal language by being specific, definite, and concrete. Some examples Strunk gives us are, why would anyone ever say that a person is not honest when you could say that they are dishonest? And why would you ever say that you could not remember when you could simply tell me that you forgot? Strunk also asked that you never tell him that an unfavorable bout of weather set in when you could have simply said it rained every day that week. And I'm sure your reader and William Strunk alike will thank you if after this video you go back over your rough draft and try to make your language more specific, more concrete, less general. And finally, we've made our way to guideline 10, which is at the end of a narrative arc comes to the takeaway. Now, as we said when the video began, the difference between biography and memoir is that biography is about the writer, whereas memoir is about the reader. It's about a universal truth couched in personal experience. And after the climax, typically in a memoir, the author likes to point towards a takeaway. Aesop's fables were uniquely accessible at providing short takeaways, and I'm going to use them as quick examples to explain a little bit of what a takeaway is. While the grasshoppers starved in winter, the ants were well fed because preparation equals survival. And when the lion saved the little mouse at the beginning of his story, and yet at the end is saved by the mouse from a human trap, we're taught the lesson that kindness pays. And how is it possible that a tortoise can beat a rabbit at a race? Well, slow and steady wins the race. These are all examples of takeaways, and they don't need to be unique. They just have to ring true and be poignant to your theme. Look back at your theme and then try to wrap things up by showing us where your characters came from to where they are today. What has changed? How are their lives different? And who they are. So to give one more example of a takeaway, let's finish my basic training story. About a week after we arrived in that initial bus incident, me and my flight of about 50 trainees were marching down a sidewalk towards an active runway when it turned out that our drill instructor had forgotten that he was marching us and got distracted, and he didn't realize to call halt. So at the very last moment, our dorm chief, who's a trainee like us, decided to yell for us to halt. So the dorm chief calling halt got our drill instructor's attention. He came up running and shouting in red, saying, "Damn it, if I tell you to march into an alligator pit, then I don't want you breaking formation on the way in." And isn't that kind of the takeaway of basic training in general? You've made it to the end of the exercise, and I'm so glad you did it. I hope you have a lovely piece of memoir that you can look back on and see the places you've been, and that you continue to write memoir, maybe write more pieces, send them off to your newspaper, who knows. Just remember that the moment that you live in is not the only moment of your life. There are many places you've been and many lives left to live. I would encourage you to be brave and share your piece, because it's a part of your life, it's true experience, and it's aimed at someone else, so it can be helpful. And if you're looking for more resources in writing, the ones that were used in this video were Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott, The Elements of Style by William Strunk, read Gordo by Jaime Cortez for some excellent funny examples of memoirs. And while you're shopping for books, you can pick up my book, Sacred Fool, and support me. I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you listening.